In the gleaming glass palace of Carrick Media, the overnight shift hummed with a quiet, electric tension that only the truly desperate ever noticed. Tessa Hartwell moved like a ghost through the corridors, her uniform a stark contrast to the Italian suits hanging loosely on the executives who had long since gone home. She was the invisible courier, the one who saw the memos before they were shredded and heard the whispers before they became spin. But tonight, the air tasted different, metallic, like the scent of a coming storm that threatened to shatter the fragile glass ceiling separating the powerful from the forgotten. A single file sat on a desk, its contents a ticking time bomb planted to destroy the vulnerable, yet Tessa held a secret far more dangerous than any headline. She was not just a struggling worker, she was the silent creditor holding the debt that could topple an empire, a truth buried under layers of assumed poverty. As Julian Carrick's cold eyes scanned the room and Maya Ellison's smile tightened with ambition, the stage was set for a betrayal that would rewrite the hierarchy. Stick around, because in a world built on lies, the only thing more dangerous than the truth is who holds it. The night shift in the newsroom was a different beast entirely, stripped of the performative busyness that defined the daylight hours and replaced by the hum of servers and the distant, rhythmic clicking of a lone keyboard. Tessa Hartwell navigated the dim corridors with a practiced silence, her worn sneakers squeaking faintly against the marble floors that cost more than her annual rent. She carried envelopes that contained future severance packages, hush money, and exclusive drafts, treating them with a reverence that the executives who wrote them rarely felt. To the rich, she was furniture, a fixture of the building's utilities, but to Tessa, this glass tower was a battlefield of information where she was the only scout watching the flanks. She paused by the senior editor's bay, noting the glowing screen and the half-empty coffee cup, clues to the exhaustion that money couldn't cure. The contrast was jarring: mahogany desks and ergonomic chairs for them, stiff backs and aching feet for her, yet she saw the cracks in their armor. It was in these quiet hours that Tessa learned the value of silence, a currency that held more weight here than the stock tickers flashing silently on the wall. Every discarded sticky note, every muttered phone call, was a piece of a puzzle she was instinctively piecing together without even knowing the final picture. She was the poor girl in the rich house, a fly on the wall who was slowly realizing she held the flyswatter, a position of power she hadn't sought but was beginning to understand. The rich pretended not to see her, assuming her eyes were downcast in submission, not missing a single detail of their moral decay. This invisibility was her shield, allowing her to traverse the heavily armored floors of the media giant without triggering the sensors of corporate suspicion. But as she slipped a delivery onto Maya Ellison's desk, she felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck, a sense that she was being watched. It wasn't the security guards, they ignored her as usual, but someone new, someone whose gaze sliced through the dim light like a laser. Julian Carrick stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette framed by the city lights below, looking like a statue carved from expensive ice and cold ambition. He turned as Tessa approached, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a recognition of her competence that unsettled her. Most executives looked through her, but Julian looked at her, seeing the worker who never missed a delivery and never gossiped, a rarity in this building of gossips and sharks. "You're here late again," he said, his voice low and smooth, lacking the usual bark of command he used on his vice presidents. Tessa simply nodded, clutching her delivery bag tighter, unsure if this was a reprimand or a genuine observation from a man known for cleaning house. He surprised her by reaching out, not to take the package, but to steady a stack of files that were teetering dangerously on a nearby cart. "Careful," he murmured, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second, a spark of warmth against the chill of the newsroom. It was a quiet kindness, jarring in its simplicity, coming from a man whose very name inspired fear in the boardroom and dread in the newsroom. Tessa felt a confusing rush of gratitude and suspicion, her guarded heart warning her that kindness in this place always had a price tag attached. She pulled her hand back, murmuring a polite "sir," and retreated, but she could feel his gaze following her into the shadows. For a man who held the power to ruin lives with a signature, he had just acted with an unexpected humanity that blurred the lines of their class war. This small moment lingered in the air, a silent disruption of the natural order where the rich ignored the poor until they needed scapegoats. Julian watched her go, perplexed by his own impulse, wondering why the ghost in the machine had suddenly become the only real thing in the room. He returned to his view of the city, but his mind was no longer on the quarterly earnings, but on the quiet dignity of the woman who just left. In a world of noise, her silence was the loudest thing he had heard in years, a subtle draw he couldn't quite explain. The whistleblower file appeared on the central server on a Tuesday morning, a ghost in the machine that materialized out of thin air and sent shockwaves through the executive suite. It contained damning allegations of accounting fraud at Carrick Media, details so precise and damaging that it threatened to trigger federal investigations and shareholder riots. But the metadata told a different story, a fabricated trail of digital breadcrumbs that led unerringly to Tessa Hartwell's terminal ID, a clumsy frame-up. Tessa stared at the screen in the break room, her coffee turning cold in her hands as she realized she was being set up for a crime she didn't commit. Maya Ellison slid into the chair next to her, her face a mask of concerned friendship that didn't quite reach her calculating, ambitious eyes. "They're saying you accessed the secure server, Tessa," Maya whispered, her voice dripping with false sympathy, planting the seeds of paranoia deeper. Tessa shook her head, her mind racing through the night's deliveries, knowing she had never touched a keyboard that wasn't logged out. "I didn't do it, Maya, you know I wouldn't know how to breach that level of security," Tessa pleaded, her voice trembling with a rising panic. Maya reached out, squeezing Tessa's hand, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a shackle being snapped onto a prisoner. "I know, but the evidence looks bad, really bad," Maya said, her tone shifting to a conspiratorial hush. "I can protect you, but you have to trust me implicitly. We need to control the narrative before legal tears you apart." It was an offer with hooks, a life raft made of lead, designed to drag Tessa down into the depths while keeping her dependent on Maya's kindness. Tessa looked around the break room, seeing the other workers averting their gaze, already sentencing her in the court of public opinion. The planted proof was a masterstroke of manipulation, turning the lowliest worker into the most dangerous saboteur in a single keystroke. She was isolated, cornered, and terrified, unaware that the person offering protection was the architect of her fall. The rich had rewritten reality again, casting the poor as the villain in a tragedy they had scripted, directed, and produced. The newsroom atmosphere curdled overnight, transforming from a place of professional indifference to a shark tank where Tessa was the bleeding prey in the water. Julian Carrick summoned the senior editors, his face a thunderhead of anger over the potential breach, demanding a head to roll to appease the panicked board. Maya Ellison sat at his right hand, her expression solemn, playing the role of the loyal lieutenant while subtly steering the blame toward Tessa. Tessa stood in the doorway of her own hearing, a plastic chair offered to her as the only seat in a room filled with leather and mahogany, a physical manifestation of her status. "We have digital footprints," Ms. Hartwell, the head of security stated, his voice devoid of empathy, brandishing the forensic report like a weapon. Tessa listened, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, realizing that her word meant nothing against the truth presented by their machines. Julian watched her, his eyes narrowed, searching for a crack in her demeanor, a sign of guilt or perhaps a sign of the fear he was beginning to recognize. He felt a strange tug in his chest, a conflict between his duty to his empire and a nagging instinct that this scenario was too neat, too convenient. Maya spoke up, her voice smooth and reasonable, suggesting that Tessa be suspended pending further investigation to save the company's reputation from immediate association. It was a legal death sentence, a way to isolate her and break her spirit before she could mount a defense, forcing her into the darkness. Tessa looked at Julian, her eyes pleading not for mercy but for a moment of fairness, a chance to breathe before the noose tightened. Their eyes met across the table, a spark of tension that had nothing to do with the allegations and everything to do with the invisible wall between them. In that look, a romance was born in the most unlikely place, a battlefield of accusations where attraction was a dangerous liability. Julian remained silent, his jaw set, choosing the path of least resistance for now, effectively allowing the scapegoat to be prepared for slaughter. The rich protected their own, and Tessa was decidedly not one of their own, no matter how many times Julian had noticed her quiet brilliance. The press conference was a spectacle of cruelty, a gladiatorial arena where Tessa was thrown to the lions without a shield or a weapon. Cameras flashed in a blinding strobe, capturing the flush of shame on her cheeks as she stood on the podium beside Maya, who looked immaculately composed. Reporters shouted questions, a cacophony of aggression demanding to know why a low-level courier would betray the company that fed her, assuming greed was her only motive. "Ms. Hartwell, did you sell the secrets to a competitor?" One voice bellowed from the back, the accusation hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Tessa gripped the lectern, her knuckles white, her throat closing up as the humiliation washed over her in hot, suffocating waves. Maya leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with a feigned regret that sounded like victory, announcing that Tessa had been identified as the source of the leaked memo. The narrative was set in stone. A disgruntled employee, envious of her betters, had tried to burn the house down out of spite. Julian stood at the edge of the room, in the shadows, watching the destruction of the woman who had once brought him a package with such quiet grace. He saw the way Tessa's shoulders slumped, the light dying in her eyes as she realized that truth was a luxury she couldn't afford. This was the public execution of her character, a ritualistic humiliation designed to satisfy the hunger of the scandal and protect the hierarchy. "We are cooperating fully with authorities," Maya added, throwing Tessa under the bus with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. The poor get punished, Tessa thought bitterly, while the rich rewrite the narrative to ensure they remain the heroes of the story. She wanted to scream, to deny it, but the crushing weight of their collective power stole the air from her lungs. It was a masterclass in dominance, a display of how easily the vulnerable could be erased by the machine they served. In the aftermath of the press conference, the newsroom buzzed with the electric thrill of the scandal, but Tessa found herself cornered in a sterile, windowless hallway by Julian Carrick. He blocked her path, his tall frame imposing, yet his eyes held a complexity that contradicted the ruthless chairman she had seen on the stage earlier. "Walk away now, Tessa," he said, his voice low and urgent, a private offer that sounded suspiciously like a threat. "If you resign quietly, I can ensure the legal pursuit stops. I can make this disappear, but you have to leave the city." It was a transaction, a rich man buying silence with freedom, treating her dignity like a bargaining chip in a high-stakes poker game. Tessa looked up at him, her anger simmering beneath the surface of her exhaustion, refusing to take the easy way out if it meant admitting guilt. "I didn't do it, Julian," she said, his name slipping out without the honorific, a breach of protocol that hung between them. "And I won't run just because it's convenient for you. My silence isn't for sale, and neither is my integrity." Julian stared at her, taken aback by her defiance, a spark of admiration mixing with his frustration at her stubborn refusal to play the game. He leaned closer, the scent of his expensive cologne overwhelming her senses, creating an intimate bubble in the midst of the chaos. "You don't understand what they will do to you," he whispered, his guard dropping for a fraction of a second, revealing genuine concern. "The machine eats people like you and trying to offer you a way out before you're crushed." It was a moment of high tension, where the power dynamic shifted on its axis, the beggar refusing the king's charity. Tessa saw the struggle in his eyes, the man fighting the chairman, and felt a confusing pull toward the enemy. She stepped around him, her shoulder brushing against his chest, a tactile rejection of his offer and his control. "I'll take my chances with the truth," she said softly, walking away, leaving Julian standing alone in the corridor. The newsroom policies turned into weapons of war, the employee handbook transformed from a guide into a manual of torture designed to break Tessa's spirit. HR called her in daily for mandatory reviews, scrutinizing her time sheets and delivery logs with microscopic precision, looking for any infraction to justify immediate termination. Security guards followed her through the building, their footsteps echoing behind her, a constant, physical reminder that she was a prisoner in her own workplace. Maya Ellison watched from her glass office, sipping her latte, her face a mask of satisfaction as the psychological pressure mounted on her former friend. The class warfare was no longer subtext, it was the text itself, printed in bold letters on the memos that slashed Tessa's pay and stripped her of benefits. Tessa's life outside the office began to destabilize, the rumors spreading through the industry like a virus, ensuring no other job would ever hire her. Landlords suddenly wanted to renovate apartments, and creditors called at all hours, sensing blood in the water and closing in for the kill. It was a debt trap of a different kind, a social and economic strangulation designed to force her into submission or destitution. Yet, Tessa endured, her back straightening with each new insult, the humiliation forging a spine of steel where doubt had tried to take root. She stopped looking at Julian, ignoring the lingering glances he threw her way from his elevated perch, focusing entirely on survival. The rich had all the leverage, the money, and the lawyers, but they underestimated the resilience of someone who had nothing left to lose. Every petty restriction, every humiliating search of her bag, just added fuel to the fire of her determination to clear her name. She realized that they weren't just trying to fire her, they were trying to erase her existence, to prove that the poor were expendable. But Tessa Hartwell was still standing, a ghost in the machine that refused to be deleted, a silent vow of resistance in a world of noise. While the day shift plotted her demise, Tessa used the night shift to fight back, leveraging her access to the physical archives that the digital natives ignored. She followed the money trail, tracking the irregularities that the whistleblower file had supposedly exposed but had actually obscured. It was tedious work, sifting through boxes of receipts and old physical ledgers, her fingers stained with ink and paper dust, but she was looking for the thread. She found it in a series of offshore transfers authorized by a shell company that didn't appear on the official Carrick Media org chart but bore Maya's signature style. The debt structure of Carrick Media was a house of cards, a complex web of loans and leverage that relied on a single, mysterious primary creditor. Tessa sat on the floor of the archive, surrounded by the smell of old paper, realizing that the leak was designed to distract from this very insolvency. She connected the dots. Maya wasn't just stealing, she was preparing to hollow out the company and blame it on a leak that she had manufactured. This was bigger than a frame-up, it was a hostile takeover from the inside, using a scapegoat to cover the theft of millions. Tessa carefully photographed the pages, her hands shaking not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt, the thrill of the investigative ethics she had always dreamed of upholding. She knew she couldn't take this to HR or Maya, so she had to find a way to inject this truth back into the newsroom workflow without being caught. The poor follow the money because they have to, while the rich hide it because they can, and Tessa was closing the gap. She tucked the ledger back into its place, erasing her physical presence, a phantom in the stacks who now held the keys to the kingdom. It was a dangerous game, playing detective while being the prime suspect, but the truth was the only weapon she had left. The second humiliation came swiftly, a public spectacle within the workplace designed to break her remaining resolve and force the confession Maya so desperately needed. Tessa was called to the central bullpen, the heart of the newsroom, where every senior editor and reporter was gathered, waiting for the show. Maya stood on a raised platform, holding a demotion letter like a decree from a king, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Effective immediately, Maya announced, her voice projecting to the far corners of the room, Tessa Hartwell is relieved of all courier duties and reassigned to the basement archives. It wasn't just a demotion, it was an exile, a banishment to the windowless depths of the building, away from the light and the people. Furthermore, Maya continued, her eyes locking onto Tessa's, you will read this apology script to the team, admitting to your poor judgment in the handling of sensitive documents. The room went silent, the air thick with the schadenfreude of the successful, the pleasure of the powerful watching one of their own fall. Tessa took the paper, her fingers trembling, reading the words that were designed to strip her of her dignity and absolve the corrupt. I made mistakes, she began, her voice barely a whisper, but she stopped, looking up at Maya, then scanning the room. She saw Julian in the back, his face unreadable, his hands clenched in his pockets, a silent witness to her execution. Tessa crumpled the paper, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room, a small act of rebellion that shocked everyone. I apologize for being poor in a rich man's world, she said, her voice gaining strength, but I will not apologize for a crime I did not commit. She turned and walked out, leaving the script on the floor, a piece of trash in a room full of them. It was a moral victory, a refusal to bend the knee, but it cost her the last vestiges of her professional safety. The basement archives became Tessa's new kingdom, a cold, damp place where the discarded history of the newspaper was stored in boxes that smelled of decay and neglect. But it was also the one place where the cameras didn't reach, the one place where the surveillance didn't follow, a blind spot in the panopticon. Julian found her there 3 days later, descending the stairs with a flashlight, his polished shoes incongruous against the concrete floor. He brought her coffee, real coffee, not the swill from the vending machine, a small offering that felt monumental in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," Tessa said, not looking up from her sorting, her walls up high, defenses fortified against his kindness. "I know," Julian replied, leaning against a stack of old editions, watching the way the dust motes danced around her. "I saw what you did upstairs. It was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave." The tension between them sparked again, a romance born in the cracks of the disaster, a truth versus convenience struggle playing out in the quiet dark. Julian reached out, tucking a stray hair behind her ear, an intimacy that felt earned despite the chasm of their status. "Why do you care?" Tessa asked, finally looking at him, her eyes searching his for the catch, the angle. "Because I'm tired of the convenient lies," Julian admitted, his voice raw, a crack in the chairman's armor. "And because I think you're the only person in this building who isn't trying to sell me something." They stood there, inches apart, the air thick with the things they couldn't say, the attraction a dangerous liability for them both. He risked his reputation just by being there, and she risked her heart by letting him in. It was a moment of fragile connection, a realization that love, or something like it, could bloom in the ruins of a career. The planted proof began to unravel, not through Tessa's doing, but through the sheer arrogance of Maya, who was sloppy in covering her digital tracks. Tessa noticed that the timestamps on the whistleblower file didn't just implicate her, they also overlapped perfectly with Maya's schedule, a glitch in the frame-up. She cross-referenced the access logs with the building's security entry data, a tedious process she did by hand in the basement. The pattern was clear: the file was created from a terminal that Maya alone had access to during those specific hours, a smoking gun hidden in plain sight. Maya, feeling invincible after Tessa's exile, started tightening the noose, pushing the board to accelerate the lawsuit against Tessa to bleed her dry legally. "She's a liability," Tessa overheard Maya saying on the phone one day, her voice dripping with venom. "We need to crush her before she realizes she has legs." It was a mistake, the hubris of the powerful assuming the victim would stay down, assuming the poor didn't have the resources to fight back. Tessa gathered the physical evidence, the printed logs, and the photocopies of Maya's signatures, creating a dossier of her own. She realized that Maya's betrayal wasn't just logical, it was desperate, a gamble to seize the chairmanship before the debt crisis came to light. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, the plan and payoff becoming clear. The leak was a distraction from the rot Maya was cultivating. Tessa felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of the hunter closing in on the prey, a reversal of roles that energized her tired soul. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was preparing to strike, using the very systems designed to oppress her as the instruments of Maya's downfall. Tessa decided to set a moral trap inside the newsroom workflow, using the ethics policy that Julian himself had championed as the trigger. She drafted an anonymous submission for the Sunday edition, a piece outlining the dangers of unchecked power and the specific case of a fictitious framed employee. She embedded the details of the planted proof and the timeline discrepancies within the narrative, a Trojan horse of truth disguised as fiction. Using an old relay server she had discovered during her night shifts, she injected the story into the digital queue for the junior editors to review. It was a risk, a massive gamble, but she knew that the junior staff, hungry for a breakout story, would bite at the scent of blood in the water. The trap was set: if they published the fiction, they would unknowingly validate the reality of Tessa's innocence and expose the method of the frame-up. She watched from the basement monitors as the story moved through the approval chain, bypassing Maya's desk thanks to a routing error Tessa had subtly engineered. The irony was delicious, using the bureaucracy against the bureaucrat, turning the newsroom's hunger for content into a weapon of justice. As the story climbed the ladder, Tessa felt the leverage shifting, the legal pressure preparing to pivot from her to the architects of the lie. It was a masterstroke of investigative ethics, proving that the truth could find a way even through the thickest walls of corporate corruption. She waited, her heart pounding, for the moment the story would break, knowing it would be the catalyst for the final confrontation. The third humiliation struck before Tessa's trap could spring, a preemptive strike by Maya designed to destroy Tessa's credibility permanently. The Sunday paper hit the stands, but not with Tessa's story instead. The headline screamed the villain in our midst, the courier who conned us. It was a brutal, multi-page exposé on Tessa's past, digging up her childhood poverty, her mother's medical debts, and painting her as a calculating grifter. It was a character assassination of the highest order, twisting her struggles into motives for greed, her silence into proof of cunning. The public narrative turned against her completely, social media lighting up with hate, her face becoming a meme for corporate treachery. Tessa walked into the office that morning to find her locker spray-painted with the word thief, her few personal belongings scattered on the floor. She stood in the center of the newsroom, surrounded by the journalists who had written the lies, their eyes averted, unwilling to meet the gaze of the monster they had created. Julian stormed out of his office, the paper in his hand, his face pale with fury as he realized the depths of Maya's sabotage. He looked at Tessa, seeing the devastation in her eyes, the emotional scar ripping open as the world turned against her. This was the cost of truth, the price of challenging the hierarchy, and it was paid in public humiliation and isolation. Tessa felt the weight of it, the crushing pressure of the machine trying to grind her into dust, but she didn't break. She looked at Julian, then at Maya, who stood on the balcony, smiling down like a queen overlooking her defeated subject. The humiliation was total, or so Maya thought, unaware that she had just pushed Tessa past the point of fear and into the realm of cold, hard retribution. Amidst the wreckage of her reputation, a single envelope arrived at Tessa's apartment, hand-delivered and stamped with the seal of a legal firm she didn't recognize. Inside was not a lawsuit, but a statement regarding an old trust, a dormant financial instrument that listed Tessa as the beneficiary of a massive debt portfolio. It was the sealed letter, the hidden leverage point, the key to the identity she had kept buried for years to survive in the harsh world of the rich. As she read the fine print, the truth crashed over her. The struggling courier was actually the primary creditor holding the note on a significant portion of Carrick Media's acquisition debt. Her family, once wealthy but destroyed by corporate sharks, had held on to this one asset, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Tessa had lived in poverty to protect this secret, to ensure the debt wouldn't be bought off or bullied away by the very people who owed her. The letter revealed that the debt was coming due, and the call for repayment was entirely within her legal rights, a power that could flip the entire board. She sat at her kitchen table, the papers shaking in her hands, realizing that she wasn't just the victim, she was the judge, jury, and executioner of Julian's world. The irony was bitter. The woman they had humiliated for being poor held the purse strings to their entire lifestyle. She traced the numbers with her finger, the sheer scale of the leverage making her dizzy. This was the hidden identity revealed to herself, the trump card that had been dealt to her before she even entered the newsroom. She tucked the letter away, a dark fire burning in her eyes, the emotional scar of the humiliation fueling a new resolve. The game had changed, and Tessa Hartwell was no longer playing by their rules. The legal pressure loomed over the newsroom like a storm cloud, as outside creditors began to circle, sensing the weakness in Carrick Media's structure. Julian called an emergency board meeting, the tension in the room palpable as he tried to rally the troops against the impending financial insolvency. He didn't know that the vultures were responding to a silent signal sent by the primary creditor. Tessaho had just authorized the call for early repayment. Maya was frantic, her plans collapsing as the financial reality of the debt crisis superseded her character assassination attempts. Tessa entered the boardroom, not as a courier, but as a legal representative of the creditor, a shockwave that silenced the bickering executives. She placed a document on the table, the formal demand for repayment, the weight of it crashing down on Julian with the force of a physical blow. "You can't do this," Julian whispered, staring at her, the realization dawning in his eyes that the woman he loved was the architect of his ruin. "I can, and I have," Tessa replied, her voice steady, hiding the breaking of her heart behind a mask of cold professionalism. The romance reached its breaking point, the love hanging by a thread over the abyss of their class war and legal conflict. Julian had to choose his reputation and the company his family built, or the truth and the woman who had captured his heart. The board members looked from Julian to Tessa, the power shift undeniable, the hierarchy inverted in a single heartbeat. Tessa watched him, praying for a miracle, but steeling herself for the justice that had to be served, no matter the cost. The identity reveal was not just a private moment, it was a public power reversal that reshaped the newsroom hierarchy in an instant. Tessa stood in the press conference room, the same room where she had been humiliated months ago, but this time she stood behind the podium, not beside it. "My name is Tessa Hartwell," she announced to the flashing cameras, her voice clear and commanding. "And I am the primary creditor of Carrick Media Group." The gasp was audible, a collective intake of breath from the reporters who had torn her apart, now realizing they had been puppets in a larger play. Julian stood to the side, having signed the transfer of power. His choice made, he chose love over reputation, relinquishing his title to save the company from immediate liquidation by accepting her terms. Maya was being escorted out by security, her face a portrait of defeat as the evidence of her embezzlement was read aloud for the world to hear. The justice payoff was absolute. The scapegoat became the savior, the poor became the powerful, and the liars were exposed. But as Tessa looked at Julian, she saw the emotional scar that would never heal, the change in their relationship that was permanent. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the rich boy who lost his kingdom and the poor girl who claimed her inheritance, the romance changed by the cost of the truth. "It's done," Julian said, offering her a sad, respectful nod, acknowledging the new order she had established. Tessa nodded back, the victory sweet but laced with the bitterness of what they had both lost to get there. The hierarchy had been rewritten, not by a memo, but by the inescapable weight of debt and truth. In the end, justice was served, but it didn't look like the fairy tales we tell ourselves to sleep at night. The bad guys fell, and the good guy won, but the victory left a mark that wouldn't fade, a reminder that every fight for truth demands a sacrifice. Tessa stood at the top of the tower she once cleaned, the city light spreading out before her, no longer a ghost but the master of the house. She had rewritten the narrative, proving that the poor aren't powerless and that the rich aren't untouchable, but the cost had been her heart's naive hope. Love, in this world of glass and greed, had transformed into something more complicated, a respect built on the ruins of what could have been. If you believe that integrity is worth the price, even when the whole world calls you a villain, then smash that like button to show your support for the truth. Tell us in the comments below if you think Tessa and Julian can ever find their way back to each other, or if some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs to remember that leverage is hidden in the most unexpected places. And if you want to uncover more stories where the underdog takes down the empire, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because we're just getting started.